therapy's so expensive, right?
Yeah.
As somebody who's like pro therapy, you're like, no, go to therapy. Like it's worth every dollar. They finally meander and get to the right therapist. Like, oh my God, that 1 hour was life changing, worth every penny of my life. But then on the therapist side, they're like, this is barely enough money for me to survive.
Welcome to Happy Hour, where we're flipping the script on the traditional happy hour. Instead of winding down at the drink, we're here to talk about what actually makes us happy and learn from society's healers, therapists, coaches, elders, spiritual leaders, and everyone in between. Join us as we dive into stories, insights, and tools that help us grow, heal, and support one another. Whether you're a seeker or a seer, this is for you. I'm Anurag, founder of Happy, and this series will be hosted by myself, along with my co-hosts, Mira and Tess, and we're excited to explore new ways to bring more joy and well-being into our lives. So take a deep breath, and let's dig in.
Today on Happy Hour, we're joined by Dr. David Cooper, a clinical psychologist who's helping shape how mental health care evolves in the digital age. His work centers on designing and scaling tech-enabled therapy solutions, supporting clinicians in the digital space, and expanding access to quality care across diverse populations. From building tools for veterans to guiding global teletherapy platforms, David brings deep clinical insight to tech that's transforming mental health. Whether it's through strategic leadership or community building with therapists and tech, his focus remains clear, making sure innovation serves both clinicians and clients. We're glad to have him with us. Let's get into a great conversation.
What's up, David?
Hey, man, how's it going?
It's good. Welcome to Happy Hour.
Excited to be here. Best happy hour I'm going to all week.
I have a smoothie here, so that's my new kind of happy hour.
That's good. I just go with caffeine as my drug of choice.
Amazing. Well, obviously you're a well-known person in the mental health community. You've had an incredible career, but just in case the person listening is new to Happy Hour and new to David Cooper, do you want to give a quick little intro?
Yeah, no problem. So, hi, I'm David. Currently executive director at a group called Therapists in Tech. It's the largest group of clinically trained folks working in digital mental health today. Have spent most of my career working with things on the technical side, right? Building products for service members around mental health, helping hospitals decide what digital tools they should use, or helping big companies like Teladoc take what they make in the US and take it to the rest of the world at scale. It's really been about how can we leverage technology to really improve how we deliver mental health care.
I love that. And just curious, sounds like you've done a bunch of different things. Just so, you know, fill us in a little bit of are there a few moments in your career that you're
Yeah.
that jumped out where you're like, man, this was career defining, just made me feel amazing as a person, or just really cemented
Yeah.
your viewpoints of what mental health is.
I think I can probably piece something together from each of the kind of things that I've done. When I first got my start, it was working for the Department of Defense, building apps for service members, right? Big stigma problem in the military. They don't want to come into the clinic. Well, how do we get the clinic out to them? And I used to tell soldiers like, hey, nobody knows if you're looking at Facebook or learning how to deal with PTSD, right? It gives them a level of anonymity and control. And the nice thing about that job is we could just make things because we thought they should be made. So we were doing everything from, you know, hey, how do we handle nightmares that associate PTSD? We worked with Sesame Street. We were looking at making serious games around, mental health support. We could really have this really open field of let's explore a lot of different ideas and see what sticks without having to worry about how do these things get funded or do they turn a profit? Maybe they just need to exist. Um, so that I think being able to kind of really open up my mind and explore a lot of different ways to tackle problems was the thing I most took away from that job. Um, since then, something that's really stuck with me too is learning the flip side of that. Like, okay, well, let's dig into how the business of healthcare operates, right? Sadly, healthcare is a business. It still requires money to run. And I've found and learned that The only way there's lots of solutions and things that we can do to help people's mental health. But the only way is if it's any good is if we make it sustainable and keep it going. And for that, the business model has to work. So really working with a lot of health systems on their digital strategies, working with folks like Teladoc on a global scale, it really helps cement that other end of sort of the barbell of like, here's all the things we could possibly do. Okay, here's all the way we can actually fund things to be sustainable. So I've really kind of tried to book into my career at those two ends and work my way back in.
It's really fascinating because I do think that for folks who build in this space and just general healthcare in America, um, it is a different kind of ecosystem. Like, it is fascinating, and I'm curious through your experience in
Yeah.
Teladoc, taking it abroad. Um, a lot of our technical team is in India,
Yeah.
and being of Indian origin, it's very interesting. There's certain nuances to the market that obviously the people who build the tech are learning and
Yeah.
understanding. And in a private pay environment, it is fascinating how much less structural challenges exist to just
Yeah.
innovating on solutions. But having
Yeah.
said that, it's really it's really accessible to only the limited set of population that can actually even afford,
Hmm.
$5 per session, right? And so, um, I'm curious, as you scaled Teladoc, like what were the big learnings that you had as you took it international?
Yeah, I definitely want to double down on what you said. The big problem in healthcare and mental health right now is how do we deliver something that is affordable enough to make it accessible to everybody and at the same time pay people what it takes to actually deliver that service? Like that is the central question I think every company is trying to struggle with. Um, coming from the US internationally, it was a whole different set of problems, I think, than coming from internationally into the US. When I talk with founders who are international and want to come to the US, it was really interesting to hear their perspective of, especially European founders, where it was like, I could go to Germany, but the Germans will never use a French app. And so like those cultural differences, even though they're one big economic system and the tech requirements are better, or a lot of cultural prohibitions that they had as opposed to coming into the US. I think when I was taking our stuff, we had to look at everything through a regulatory, cultural, and clinical lens. So, clinically, how do they talk about these concepts? Like we talk about anxiety and depression. We
Yeah,
talk about opiates more freely, I think, than other places.
totally.
And so how do they tackle these things in India? How do they discuss anxiety from a
Yeah,
cultural lens?
totally.
And then it goes into, and then you go in the cultural lens. What's the language used? It's not enough to say, we're going into the UK, so we have to replace mom with mum or, things like that. It's making sure you're using the language that the folks use. And then from a regulatory perspective, often it is easier from a regulatory perspective for folks outside of the US coming in because we don't have GDPR. We don't have a
Yeah,
lot of the privacy and security regulations that you see elsewhere. Um, but that also prevents challenges for us going there, right? Of every regulatory market is different. You're going to have to tackle different challenges. And something that really cemented this example for me was talking about and handling suicide
yeah,
patients. In the
totally.
US, you might design your product to not ask a lot of information because you're like,
Yeah,
I don't want to keep PHI.
yep,
I don't want to have to deal with this. I know companies who've not asked, they use like PHQ-8 because they eliminate the suicide question because they're like, don't ask, don't tell. You go overseas and that's required in some places. Like the
yeah,
US, it's like required that you connect that person with law enforcement. So then you have to collect, not only do you have to ask, you have to collect more PHI and figure out how to handle that PHI. So it really makes you think from like a commercial and builder's perspective. It's really fundamentally different product basis that you're talking about.
you're designing for. It makes sense because, I mean, mental health is definitely not a one size fits all, right? There's
Mm-mm.
so much cultural nuance baked in and cultural evolution. So, that's a really fascinating learning actually, because I think for builders and founders, you and two are like, oh, you know, you have anxiety here, you have anxiety there.
Yeah,
You
it's the
know,
same.
it's the same, and it's obviously absolutely not.
Right.
Um, awesome. Well, that kind of leads me into this next question. So, sounds like for the past couple years, you've been advising, exploring the market, sort of being a shepherd of the community in a lot of ways, to which I think many, many people have benefited. What is in your crystal ball? So the exercise I want to
Yeah.
walk through is something that I think I picked up from Lab, 126 at Amazon, who created Echo and a bunch of other products. And the exercise is pretty simple. If you were to describe, in 5 years, accelerate all the directions of AI.
Mhm.
I don't know if we hit AGI or whatever direction it gets. There's a new form factor that's recording every moment of our life.
Right.
And, if models get shrunken down and they're run locally, there's so many different components that are happening. Or if the world is just amidst World War III, like who knows what the direction is. However, in 5 years, if the vision of where the US mental health industry should head
Yeah.
using technology, given that perhaps the number one use case for ChatGPT today is a version of psychotherapy slash companionship.
Yeah.
What does that future look like in 5 years?
I'll tell you what I would like it to look like, and then we can talk about what it might actually look like. What I'd like it to look like is there's a science fiction writer I like wrote a really interesting short story about, what happens if you can use all of this data that we all collect about each other to help improve your life in some way, right? Like this concept of like a personal area network that you own that like what would it be like to have like a Strava for your entire healthcare and or
Oh,
even
yeah.
just your mental health, right? Like something that is taking all of this data and helping you make sense of it in a way that I think it ultimately benefits you, right? We're going to be recording conversations, we're going to be recording all of your emails, it's going to have access to your calendar. And so I think having a system that can help you reflect and think about things, I think would be great. Um, you know, I've done this. I know other folks have done this sort of in a ad hoc fashion, but like, oh wow, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if your, Fitbit gave you, hey, I noticed a really high heart rate before this meeting today
Yeah.
with, your boss. What was anxious about that? Can we talk about ways to make you less anxious before going? Were you anxious? Were you angry? Like, and helping you kind of tease that apart, almost like a extra executive functioning system.
Yeah.
Or you think about it after, oh my gosh, you're just in a car wreck. You in these moments you're emotionally overwhelmed. Something that can like come alongside you, be like, hey, let's stop. Like, here's a checklist you can follow. Are you safe? Do this, do that. And when our own executive functioning or things aren't working, something that can be a prosthesis over top of that. That's
Correct.
where I'd like it to go. Where I think it's going to go is we're going to figure out how to extract more value out of AI. And I can definitely see, I don't think healthcare is immune to this. In fact, healthcare might be, I saw an interesting post. Somebody was basically saying like doctors are going to be more susceptible to AI than software engineers.
Yep.
Right. Everybody's using code to like make software stuff. But when you think about a lot of healthcare, it is, data processing. You're taking in symptoms, you're taking in their history, you're talking to them, and then it's pattern recognition. Okay, these symptoms cluster together to mean X, Y, or Z.
Totally.
And then doing a follow-up based on that to gather more information and feed that back into a pattern machine. And I think that process is very susceptible to automation or, I think we'll still have probably laws about humans being in the loop, but how do we protect ourselves? I think we, in the mental health field need to be thinking about that too,
Yeah.
right? Therapy to some extent is pattern recognition and content recommendation, right? I'm taking in data. Okay, it seems like every time you talk about your mom, you're very angry. What is that about? And eliciting more information to get data. Okay, based on that, I think you have a problem with this. let me recommend some exercises or some things that we can do, or even just questions to help you clarify.
Yeah.
All of that, I think, can be susceptible to a form of AI, automation, what have you. And so we really need to think about what is the differentiator that therapy brings beyond that, and how do we lean into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we started Happy, we used to call it, everyone deserves an angel on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Um, and as not trying to make it denominational at all, I'm actually a practicing Hindu, but,
Yeah.
I think it's a good construction where I think most people want to have something that encourages them in positive habits. I think, like you said, it comes down to trust. And
Right.
that's where I'm curious of your thoughts is, if we're working backwards out of that vision statement, supposing the most hypothetical, the magic wand is waved and it actually came to life
Right.
of what it most optimistically should be. How does this system actually gain users' trust? How did it communicate to the world that that it is safe, it is secure, it is private, and you as a user aren't the customer.
I think transparency has to be key. If there is I mean, right, like this goes back to sort of the tension between, we could probably do that today with technology. Would it survive in a direct to consumer model where you pay for it, right? Like, what does that look like, right? Would you pay 50, $100 a year for something like that if it was totally self-contained with your data? Maybe. I don't know. We need to explore that. But other than that, I think transparency is key, right? Having, maybe it looks like some kind of having stake in the game, or you can pay extra for different tiers, right? Like totally private, kind of like we do with commercials for streaming services. Like, yeah, I'll take, or maybe I will take a commercial or two, but you're transparent with that. I could definitely see that of being a funding mechanism of like, hey, eh, let's imagine it is in a perfect world, not a capitalist hellscape, but my mind immediately goes to the terrible end, but let me go to the good end for a second, right? Hey, I have a genuine recommendation for you of, your sleep seems to be getting disrupted. Here's an ad for some melatonin pills you can order on Amazon.com,
Totally.
right? Like something like that and make it easier. This would work. Giving them some direction, right? One of my projects that I worked on was like Amazon recommendations for doctors, right? So that don't just go get a prenatal vitamin. Here's 5, pick
Yeah,
one, right? Like
correct.
giving them some kind of direction to go into. Um, I could see that supporting that kind of model. But again, I think it has to be transparent, right? Like you're getting this because I'm making a very clear recommendation. You should get, maybe it's the recommendation is go get some melatonin. Great. Here's a link to Amazon where you can get like 5 different ones or what have you. Same kind of
Right.
idea.
So I asked the big question is what happens to the people who actually, like professionally, know how to help people in their inner worlds?
It's a good, it's a yeah, it's a good question. It's a challenge that I think a lot about, right? Sometimes there's a lot of parallels between, I think, between what's happening now and what's happened before in therapy, right? At the very beginning stages of therapy, right? You go into like Freud and psychoanalysis. It was very expensive. It was for people who could afford the time to come in multiple times a week, sit
Yeah,
for an hour and talk.
yeah,
Then you had sort of the cognitive behavioral therapists come in and say like, nope, you come in once a week, once every 2 weeks, we knock it out in an hour, we're done. Um, and you get more immediate symptom relief. And so you had psychoanalysis become this sort of like artisanal form of therapy where
yeah,
CBT became the workhorse. And I can see that pattern sort of playing out again, where what comes next out of all of this, I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but does traditional therapy become sort of this artisanal Etsy model, right?
yeah,
Where it's
totally.
like only the wealthy can afford a face-to-face person and everybody else has to get a chatbot. I hope it doesn't go there, but I can definitely see that kind of playing out again.
Yeah, and I think it's a build on that. It's funny, when I was at Uber, we were sort of trying to find all sorts of ways to introduce rideshare, reduce the miles congestion in suburban neighborhoods. And the interesting part was that nothing beats the convenience of having your own car in your driveway with your golf clubs in the back, you know?
Exactly.
And it's hard because it is true. Like, if we can get close to a solution that has continual context, understands you, has the right set of recommendations, you trust and rely
Yeah.
on it, it seems like a system that everybody would want in their pocket and rely on. And I think that's a fascinating future, but I do think on the flip side, and I'm curious your thoughts, is like, what happens when we have a society that is sort of being governed by a system that is designed and built by people that I may or
Yeah.
may not be relevant to in my community, giving me directions? And I'll give a good example. When I went to India, it was fascinating to sort of get a sense of the therapeutic landscape. And boundaries is not necessarily a construction in collectivist cultures. It's just not a thing, right? Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. It's like, for me waking up, my mom just walking into my room at 6 a.m. to be like, it's time to wake up, shower,
Yeah.
right, and have breakfast. That's just normal, right? And that's okay, because that's kind of how the system runs, right? There's all these other advantages you get to collectivist cultures. What happens when the system is like a one size fits all for mental health, and it's
Yeah.
missing the cultural nuance, it's missing the cultural context? Like, what do we already see it in social media of, like, TikTok therapy.
Yeah.
Everyone's a narcissist. So how do we prevent that from not happening again?
I think I think you have to have solutions that are not built by like the weird demographic, right? White,
Yeah.
urban, those kind of things, right? Like that Silicon Valley
Yep.
tends to
Yep.
gravitate towards.
Sure.
And I think it's, again, building it intentionally. We have to have founders who have those intentions and maintain those intentions at the North Star, right? Like Uber's a great example. Totally starting out, that's a great idea. There are a bunch of like town cars sitting around. Ordering a taxi sucks. You trying to get them to pay with your credit card. I remember back in that day, is not fun.
Totally.
In the days before Uber, and it was a great
Maybe you
outcome.
sign the
Also,
receipt.
exactly. Did you sign the receipt? Yeah, yeah. No cash. Yeah, like, damn it. But right, and then you have the unintended consequences that come with that. And so I think like having a founder who takes those seriously and is engaged with the community, I think is super important. Because it is going to look different for different people. What works in the US, and again, we know that just from basic psychological science, right? We allow for cultural, differences, the maybe the same general ideas, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, all play out and look differently based on your cultural context. So systems are going to have to adapt to that. And what it looks like to be mentally healthy in a collectivist culture is going to look very different than an independent culture in the US, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't want the AI being like, oh, you're still living with your mom at 25. You got to move out of the house. Listen, that's not going to work in India,
Totally.
right? Like,
Yep.
that's going to be a different goal. And so how do you design a system that works not only with this is the billion-dollar question. How do you design a system that works with a person's own goals, isn't overly sycophantic, tells them what they need to hear, but does so in an engaging and profitable way?
Yeah.
I think when somebody figures that out, then we'll know what comes next in mental health, because that'll eat the market.
I guess, like, David, like, one higher level meta question is like, what's the goal? Like, and I'm just curious from a clinical perspective, like, I hear this all the time. You see this uptick where, everyone's reporting a mental health crisis, this, that, whatever. And it just so correlates with the advent of
Yeah.
the mobile phone. And so, like, what gives in society today? Like, why are
Yeah.
we here?
It's tough, right? Again, it gets back to that. I think it gets back to that law of unintended consequences, right? The internet, amazing tool, brings everybody together, but you also see, it having this effect of a proliferation, or it can exacerbate mental illness, right? Used to be like you were the only person who dealt with a thing in your community, and you just thought, well, I'm a little bit different, and I try to fit in with the rest. But when you can find groups that amplify, right? You can see that in like the anorexic community, when they
Totally.
build these referencing groups of people who want to normalize a behavior that's not healthy and not great for folks, and is hard to struggle with. um it can have that effect as well, right? A tool is a tool is a tool, and AI is just another tool, and it's going to have good effects and bad effects on our mental health. So I don't know. I think the goal, my North Star, was always trying to put myself out of a job as a therapist, I guess, to build a world without therapists, right? Build a world where everybody had the tools to manage their own mental health in a way that help them live their best life. I don't know if we're going to get there anytime soon or even in my lifetime, but I think that's a world worth building, where everybody has access to the tools they need to help them self-actualize in that way.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the thought that often came to mind is there are perhaps some parallels in sort of the evolution of
Yeah.
religion. And
Yeah.
a lot of the philosophical constructs, when you started to, there's some philosophies and religions that basically have a very structured approach to sort of life and well-being. And there's always
Yeah.
like a guru or like a priest or a leader that was sort
Yeah.
of the sort of distributor and the arbiter
Mm-hmm.
of what's right, wrong, in that information. Then you had other certain in some examples, and this is, I don't think any religion's immune to it, but you had some parts of religions where it's like, hey, this is like truly open source. This is like bottoms up. You can buy
Right.
a Bible, you can buy a Buddhist scripture, you can buy a Hindu scripture, you can get the Quran, and you can self-study, and you can go build these habits. And I'm curious if the orientation for these AI systems is with the ultimate purpose is, it sounds like it's just the separation of self and self-awareness, is sort of taking whatever this experience that you're having is and having a metacognition process is sort of
Yeah.
what, but in some ways, I guess an argument could be made that's somewhat antithetical to what AI does, because AI is actually designed to get you to not think.
Well, or at least to keep you using it, right? Like that's the thing. Like when people talk about ChatGPT becoming overly sycophantic, it's like, yeah, the business model is you got to keep using this. And that's something we struggle with in the mental health field, is that, hey, at some point, the whole point of this is at some point you don't need it.
Yeah.
And whether that's private practice, like I'm an individual therapist, or, I'm a large mental health company, right? I need to figure out, what does it look like for planned obsolescence, right? That you won't need this. So if I do my job right, you won't need this, right? You'll have the tools and skills and things that you need to be able to do this on your own. And yeah, again, I like the ideas, that metacognitive layer, right? Like that, I think that goes back into that North Star idea for mental health, and what tech can do for us is, we already outsource parts of our brain to these things, right? Like
Totally.
nobody can remember anybody's phone number anymore,
Yeah.
or anything like that.
Get directions.
How do we outsource that? Not as even emotional regulation, but like that ability to regulate our own thinking, right? Whether it's anxiety, giving into anxiety, or treating anxiety, for us, it all takes place in one place up here, right? And so what if we had something outside of that that could help us, again, navigate those tricky processes when our brains just aren't doing what we want them to do?
Yeah. So it sounds like in 5 years, I mean, if all things go to plan, I mean,
Right.
we'll have the perfect assistant in their pocket, which deeply understands them, they can trust, they can rely on, and it asks them questions
Yeah.
continually to observe themselves and get to a point where they truly understand the observer state.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even just, uh, I mean, I don't even think you have to go all the way there for it to be helpful or useful, right? Like having a system that can monitor you and be like, hey, do you need to take a break right now? Let me rearrange some of your meetings. Hey, you just got, like, I don't know, you get a call, one of your parents is in the hospital. You're like, hey, can I have an assistant that I can just dump all this stuff over to, and it'll automatically do it? And I don't, like, there's a lot of, I think, scaffolding ideas around that give me a system that can help me when I'm feeling overwhelmed, that we can do without it being, overly creepy or intrusive or anything like that. It's just, we have to ask and support tech built for us rather than to provide us value rather than to extract value from us, right? Like, I mean, that's too many times the way tech goes is extractive, right? Especially if you're not paying for it. The old saying is, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product, right? And your data is the product. So encouraging tools to go down that road of providing that benefit to folks. But I think there's a lot of different ideas.
Yeah. Is there like, as you've been looking at the space, are there certain people, and whether it's in mental health or outside, where you're
Yeah.
like, hey, they're doing this right. They're doing this right. That, as new builders in space are looking up to, and even legacy systems like, whether it's like a Simple Practice or like a Jane or
Hmm.
EHRs, are there folks or a Teladoc, right? Or Headspace or,
Yeah.
Calm. Are there certain companies that you've seen in the technology industry over a period of time where you're like, hey, the, the ethics of who they are is
Yeah.
shining through their product. They are additive to clients versus exploitative, or not
Yeah.
exploitative. Like, are there a few shining beacons of examples?
I think there are a lot of them. And I'll say, rather than maybe give some explicit examples, 'cause I could probably go on for hours for
Sure.
specific examples. I think there's a phrase that I've been using more and more that I think resonates with me more and more. That's the distinction between a healthcare company and a tech company in healthcare. And I think tech companies in healthcare are ones that don't have good clinical leadership at the top, or who aren't involving clinically trained folks in the process. I remember talking with one CEO who was saying, like, yeah, I listen to my CMO, and if she tells me not to do something, I don't do it. And I just had to really stress with him of, like, that's very rare in this industry. I know you don't think it is, but I think that is increasingly rare. And I think healthcare companies have clinically, trained folks as advisors, and in part of building these solutions. We'll have them in C-suite roles, and they'll actually be part of the decision making part of the company, not just, a personnel lab coat they trot out on a Zoom meeting. And I think us, companies, employers, payers, need to be better and more savvy consumers about who we give our money to, and not give our money to tech companies in healthcare. Because if you are not showing through your corporate structure, through your corporate practices, that you value that clinical focus, and that you recognize healthcare is different, like, the treating somebody's mental health is a lot different than selling screen doors on
Yeah.
Amazon.com. Some of the underlying tech and ideas and A/B testing and all the rest of that stuff, yeah, it comes along,
Yeah.
but it's different.
Yep.
Um, and if you don't demonstrate that you appreciate that difference, that's where I think those are the companies who take the time to do that are the ones we should focus on, and who I think are doing it right, and will ultimately succeed.
Yeah, it's like you first have to run the manual crank on things and give it to a level of mastery, which is obviously what
Yeah.
clinical folks have done, right? And this is just like you said, a new technology layer that will have positive effects and negative effects, but the foundational, you know, hate to use this phrase, but the first principles of psychotherapy
You bet.
need to be baked in, right? And
Right.
people who've done it for 20 years understand that. One example that comes to mind is actually the group that you're heading is Therapists in Tech. From what I've heard and researched, is the folks at Empathic have actually pulled this off. There's
Yeah.
Grin's a therapist herself. And
Yeah.
sounds like that's one organization I keep coming back to, not super marketed, but the work that they do from across the industry sounds incredibly foundational. Um,
It really is, right? Like, for those of you who don't know, Empathic, founded by Grin, who also founded Therapists in Tech, um, do the incredibly unsexy process of helping with data labeling and recognition when it comes to these AI systems. There's a lot of things I think we don't appreciate behind a lot of these AI systems is just what intensive legwork and processing of all the data goes into play to be able to produce, the experience of asking ChatGPT a question and it giving you this giant long response, or it feeling really empathetic. It's because somebody has gone in and said, well, this is an empathetic response and this is a non-empathetic, or this is a happy response, this is a sad response. And so doing that at scale for companies, doing that for um, pharma companies and people trying to figure out how do we bring better drugs and better care to people at scale when there are so many, again, manual clinical touch points that still go on in that process. How do we help them go faster? Again, I think that's a thing a lot of people don't realize is there's so many. Once you open the lid of healthcare, like there is the front facing part of healthcare of, actually being one-on-one clinician to patient. There, for every there's probably like 2 or 3 people behind the scenes trying to power things like billing or,
Totally.
compliance and things like the unsexy parts of healthcare, but doing those right make the face-to-face part so much easier and better.
Totally. Yeah, it's fascinating where it really sounds like, and we've talked to quite a few clinicians. It sounds like most of them love this idea. I think most of them are centered around really wanting just to make people feel better. I don't think anybody really becomes a therapist in the US to try to make gobs of cash. It's just not the job to.
Or to wrestle with insurance, right? Like, I don't think you get up in therapy. You're like, I'm here to make my patients feel better.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to like twist around a diagnosis or,
Right.
make sure I fill out this form in triplicate. Like, ugh, nobody likes that.
Totally. And it's like we talked about earlier, it's a double-edged sword because it's like, okay, well, yes, insurance means that more people can get coverage, but that also means that as for-profit corporations, they are looking to not spend as much money, right? That's just like the
Right.
inherent property of it. But when talking to them, it sounds like it's those things that they need help with. Like,
Yeah.
on the human side, they're like, we don't want to do insurance. These notes are really frustrating. I just want to talk and heal. That is just literally what I want to do. And it sounds like there's also a role of AI to, like you said, is sort of be this orchestration layer to sort of solve a bunch of these operational challenges.
Absolutely. I think back to one of the books I picked up when I was first learning how to code was called Automate the Boring Things, right? And it was, how do you use code to, again, make your life better, easier,
Totally.
not have to spend hours and hours on stuff. And I think that is a good North Star for a lot of companies, especially a good entry point into getting AI into mental health care. Is not right to jumping into the chatbot is going to replace you as a therapist can go away. We're going to have a chatbot that's going to take care of everybody's mental health. It's, you as a therapist are valuable. I love that human relationship. Let me automate the boring stuff so that you can do more of what you like doing and why you got into this.
Yeah. So I know earlier you also mentioned, at least in the United States, one of the big challenges is around business models. And
Yeah.
so is there a role that AI can? So, I mean, if you look at it from a simple clinician's practice, right? The cost structure is like, hey, maybe I start off with $99 sessions, hopefully land in a couple years to $250, $300 sessions, just generally on average. And then I have a book client load of about 20 to 30 clients at maximum. And then I can hopefully offload some of those to a second therapist and sort of go on and so on and so forth. Now, given 70% of clinicians, roughly, it sounds like in the US are private pay, they just don't even want to deal with insurance.
Right.
Because of all the headaches. What are some emergent models? Because on one hand, you talk to the consumer like, oh my God, therapy is so expensive, right?
Yeah.
As somebody who's like pro therapy, you're like, no, go to therapy. Like, it's worth every dollar. And then they finally meander and get to the right therapist. Like, oh my God, that 1 hour was life changing, worth every penny of my life. But then on the therapist side, they're like, this is barely enough money for me to survive.
Right.
So what have you thought of, like, what are some of the novel ways to go around this? Is it scaling the hours of a therapist? Is it somehow allowing therapists to sort of operate at scale? What are some thoughts that you've had that come to mind around
Yeah.
this?
I think it's a couple things. Like, one of them you can look at definitely at scale, right? And how do you do that? I think that's, for me, that's most evident on maybe a a niche part of mental health, but like psychological assessment. I used to do
Totally.
a lot of testing of people for things like ADHD and brain injury. There are a lot of ways we can scale that with tech, right? And AI too, and to go from, it used to take me an entire day to write a report, right? And then maybe now I can edit 5, right? Because AI is going to take the data and give me a product that I can go back and edit.
Yeah.
And then we're going to take that and give you a report for the school, a report that, a 6-year-old could understand, right? Like, and really like multiplex based on that. Again, things that you can do at scale that are very intensive to do one-on-one now. I think too, it's going to be, we really need to reimagine, I think, what therapy looks like with the assumption that technology exists,
Yeah.
right? A lot of what we do today in therapy is just doing it virtually, right? Like doing the same kind of stuff that we've been doing since the 50s, 60s, CBT. We're just doing it over Zoom, or we're doing it inside an app. And so really trying to think about, what is the role of the therapist? What is the role of the human connection? What is the value that data and interaction and stuff brings to the table? I think we're starting to see it in little pockets, but I really would love for someone to kind of imagine, what does this look like differently? You see little pockets of it, like Talkspace doing a podcast in between sessions. I don't know if that's right or if that's the right framework, but I know that's probably better for some people than a photocopied handout that's been
Totally.
copied to death 20 million times that you hand out to somebody and they lose it or something in between sessions. So yeah, I think that is really the next maybe impetus for my field, is we need to kind of say, hey, technology exists. It's not going away.
Yeah.
How do we change what we do to take advantage of that rather than try to continue to rail against it and resist it?
Yeah. That makes sense. And I'm curious. I mean, so this group that you're running, Therapists in Tech, for somebody who's a non-therapist, but
Yeah.
I call it therapy aficionado, who's really benefited from every clinician that I've met and helped. Like, what is the inside of that discussion? Like, where
Yeah.
is it in the industry today? Because you go on Reddit, it's like all over the place. But ostensibly,
Right.
Therapists in Tech is a community that's, probably actively seeking out a conversation around technology and therapy. What is the pulse?
Yeah. I think it ranges. I think you have sort of like 10 to 20% of folks who are like bought in, and or maybe even like 10% who are not only bought in but like really trying to explore the idea, right? Like, we're using ChatGPT agents for our own mental health, or like,
Yeah.
what is this, building a chatbot? Like, what does
Yeah.
this look like? How does this work? Um, and then you think you have like, another section of that who are like, yep, I'm bought in. I'm going to figure out how this works. Or they're maybe just new to the field and learning like what a product manager does, or how does this thing run? How do we make this more efficient? And then I think you have a large subsection of the field is sort of, I'll call it technologically curious, but we don't really know what to do with it. I think, like many fields, mental health is not immune to sort of the trends of clinical burnout for all the reasons that we've said on this podcast: insurance, billing, economic pressures. I think a lot of people are burnt out working for corporate kind of mental health models and
Oh,
are
yeah.
looking for something different,
Yep.
and see tech as something different, and so are curious from it from that perspective.
Totally.
How do I get into tech is a question we get all the time
Yeah.
from folks. And so I think that a lot of what we do is just that very basic early education of, this is what it's like. It's not frolicking field where everyone gets $500,000 and, a year in salary, and we just, eating nothing but candy. It's, let me disabuse you of the realities of that. It's a slog, just like any other part of the healthcare field, but doing some of that basic education so that people can understand what it's like. I think we need to be, as psychology, we need to be better about, and bringing this back into graduate education. I've done a
Yeah.
few talks at graduate schools of just like, hey, this is what AI can do. This is what it's like working in digital health, like exposing people to that, because I think it's still just not on anybody's radar as far as what a training program for that actually looks like, what a career in that actually looks like. And a lot of people are still getting trained to become researchers or clinicians, right? Like those are the kind of the two paths,
Yeah. Um, it sounds like we need to build a course on this.
right?
Uh, I had a friend, I know the founder of a company called Maven. That might be an interesting platform.
Well, yeah, I love Maven.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like this should be a thing. But I guess the last question is like you touched a little bit on therapist burnout.
Yeah.
I want to go into that a little bit because I've heard this in many
Mhm.
circles, like many circles of like, the clinicians are burned out. Clinicians are burned out. Obviously we know downstream if your therapist is burned out, you know, that's going to
Yeah.
affect care for sure. And so from a structural standpoint, first, like, you know, what are your views on the supply demand imbalance, right? That exists or that is sort of perceived to exist.
Yeah.
Because if I had a dollar for every time a clinician's like, I need more caseload. And, you know, that's an interesting question on Peel. And the second is from a burnout perspective, like who is doing something meaningful? For those that are listening that are like a burned out
Yeah.
clinician, um, like where do they turn to? What do they do? What are some tools and options? I mean, obviously therapists know what to
Yeah.
do, but it's, the same reason why doctors like drinking wine.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think there's a couple things driving it, right? We know from the research, a couple things tend to drive burnout. And that's when, your job, there's a mismatch between sort of your job and emotional congruence, right? You're being asked to do something that you have maybe a moral conflict with, or you maybe don't have enough control over your own schedule. And I can see that driving a lot, I think, of people away from more, sadly, clinical roles where it can do the most good at, like local clinical levels for Medicare, Medicaid, that community clinic level, because I don't think until you do it, I think you talk to people about therapy
Yeah.
and you're like, how hard is it to sit there and listen to folks all day? And on the flip side, when you're doing, I think, 8 hours, 10 hours a day, back to back to back of not just kind of like sad people, but like seriously suicidal people who need it the most,
Yeah.
you come home and your brain is just exhausted because you have been an emotional receptacle. Your empathy has been on, and the process of therapy is, well, I'm trying to be here and listen to this moment in the patient. I'm also trying to think about, like, from my training,
Totally.
how do I process this? Also, what did they say last week? Also, what am I thinking and feeling? Am I bringing that into any of this group? Am I hungry? Right? Like, there's just this weaving of all these kind of emotional strands that you're having to juggle at the same time. And yeah, it is just,
A
it
lot.
doesn't seem like much, but it is cognitively exhausting at the end of the day. It's really hard cognitive work at the, when you're doing it right. And so I think about that. And again, it goes back to the question of how do we find models that make it okay to work 20 hours a week and still have right? Because you
Yeah.
can't do that 8 hours a
No,
day,
totally.
5 days a
It's
week,
heavy.
7 days a week,
Yeah.
even. How do we think about therapy in a way that, again, doesn't make it all about the face-to-face hours, or allows for people to do more, you know, outside of the clinic on their own, but still, is seeing the therapist as a valuable coordinator of all of that and
Correct.
architect of helping the person with their mental health. How do we, like, kind of like you said, how do we have companies that do it right? I love seeing more um, clinician founder companies like Consult List, or Empathic, or some of these folks who are like, oh yes, I have a clinical founder at this who is doing it for the right reasons and attending to the clinical experience, as opposed to, I'm just going to make everybody a 1099 employee and be super extractive from it,
Sure.
right?
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is, thank you for sharing that because I don't think people really understand that.
Yeah.
So you've been around it where it's like there is this distinction of that. We're reminding me of the wouldn't it be nice, right? There's a different. We've all been there where it's like
Yeah.
empathy feels different than sympathy, right?
Absolutely.
And I think sympathy gets a bad rep, right? Because it's all about the empathy, but I think sympathy is actually valuable, where you kind of,
Hmm.
can sort of mirror the emotion, but not necessarily relive the experience a person's has,
Right.
and have to
Right.
cognitively process the entire
Yeah.
experience. And it sounds like that's perhaps an opportunity for AI is if you could, on the other side, is there as a clinician, it listens to every session, understands, but it is
Yeah.
that therapeutic assistant as such, right? It remembers things. It's
Yeah.
literally having an assistant in the room constantly who manages the coordination, manages the treatment plans, manages all the logistics, and you can just be there as a pane of glass and just be human, you know?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of elements of AI that I think are going to be beneficial, or I can see being beneficial, right? The always available nature of it, of I can 2 a.m, I can't sleep, I can talk something out with an AI chatbot. It's always patient, right? Thank God it's always patient. I'm sure if this was a human, there are so many times ChatGPT would have yelled at me for trying to figure out some technical issue or bug that I'm having, right? It's you can stop conversations and pick them back up right where you left off.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of those like aspects of how we're designing this models are ultimately, I think, going to be helpful for folks, right? To be able, and I can see those being helpful components to alleviate some of that.
Yeah. Um, and I guess the last question, David, is, for those that are building this, um, and who are listening to this podcast, what's like the one thing that you want all the builders, for whatever vantage point, whether you're a therapist, clinician, customer, builder, what's like the one thing that you kind of sort of everyone should be thinking about? That like what's that one piece of advice?
Don't assume because you're an expert in your domain that you know everything. And I think that goes for builders, clinicians, software developers, everybody. I think too many times you see people coming in from outside of healthcare who've had success, maybe in SaaS or something, coming in and thinking, okay, I know how to get this done. You guys all just need to shut up and listen to me and I'll figure this out. And I can also see that coming from the clinical side of things, right? Like you bring a researcher in to like help you with your company and they're like, nope, you got to do an RCT and this is the only way that it's valid. And if
Yeah.
you don't do it this way, then
Yeah.
it's stupid.
Yeah.
Right. And I think regardless of whatever side you're approaching it from, being okay to ask questions or open up space for someone to educate you about something. And yeah, maybe I don't have to have all the answers if I'm the CEO. Maybe I don't have to come off as quite such an authority if I'm the clinician being asked to comment on some of this stuff. But being okay that, hey, I know what I know, but I don't know everything you know. So like, let's talk about that and see where there is mutual overlap where we can build that trust and respect in each other, right? Like I don't come into a software developer telling them how to code an API and I don't want them coming to tell me how to do therapy.
Yeah.
Like, let's figure out how to do it together because that's the only way stuff gets better.
Sounds like you operate in the dialectic.
Exactly. The dialectic. Gotta love every psychologist loves a good dialectic.
Well, David, thank you so much for chatting, bestowing your wisdom, sharing. I know one as a builder in this space. Thank you. We're so thankful for the energy and just the presence you carry. And I sincerely hope that the vision that you painted, I feel as an optimist, will come true. And, where intention goes, the energy flows.
I hope that's the case, and I'll keep my fingers crossed for that. And again, love seeing good people coming into this space with open minds and good intentions. So always a pleasure to chat.
Absolutely. Last is if people want to find you and they want to get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can always find me there, or come join Therapists in Tech and say hi there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, David. Thanks for being on Happy Hour, and enjoy the rest of that cup of coffee.
Thanks, man. Enjoy your smoothie.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Thank you so much for joining us for Happy Hour. We hope you walked away having learned something and feeling a little less alone on the journey. If you liked what you heard, it would mean so much to us if you subscribe. You can be notified every time we have a new episode. To learn more about what we are doing at HPY, go to thinkhpy.com. Until next time, we hope you feel heard. Take care.